They never expected an illegitimate child to rearrange an entire household. Yet every whisper, every distant glance, and every cautious decision revealed how one birth could unsettle the people who thought they were safe. The mistress was no longer temporary. The wife was no longer unquestioned. The family was no longer stable. Tonight, we step inside the quiet storm that rewrote their world. So, before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Only if your heart truly wants to. If you do like it, leave a little comment letting me know what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights. Adjust the pillow to fit your head. Maybe turn on a fan to create a relaxing atmosphere. And let's begin this journey together tonight. If one were to stand inside a Tudor household and listen closely, it would become clear that every hope, every fear, and every whispered calculation revolved around the possibility of a son. The value of a male child was so deeply woven into the structure of the era that nothing else seemed to matter. A son meant continuity, the survival of titles, lands, and expectations passed down through generations. Families did not merely want a male heir. They depended on him in ways that shaped their daily lives. Without one, a household trembled beneath the weight of uncertainty, knowing that everything they possessed could slip out of their hands the moment a distant relative decided to make a claim. Women lived in the shadow of this pressure, their worth, quietly measured by those around them, rose or fell with their ability to produce a male child. It created an atmosphere where affection and personal longing carried little influence compared with the practical concerns of inheritance. A daughter might be welcomed, but she did not secure the family's standing. Un son, however, could silence doubts, protect estates, and anchor a lineage that might otherwise splinter. In this environment, childbirth was not simply a private event, but a political moment, and the body of a woman became the fragile vessel on which entire futures depended. Marriage itself existed under these expectations. While sermons and poets spoke of love and virtue, the reality was far more calculated. Families entered unions with the careful eye of merchants, assessing what gains might be secured and what losses avoided. Lands combined, debts were balanced, and alliances strengthened through a single wedding. But none of these accomplishments held real weight unless they produced a son who could ensure that agreements remained intact beyond the lifetime of the parents. Without him, everything could unravel. This pressure did not stay confined to noble households. Even among the less wealthy, the idea of a male heir carried enormous significance. Farmers relied on sons to continue the labor that kept the family alive. Tradesmen needed sons to inherit tools, skills, and the rights to continue their work. In every corner of the realm, from great manor houses to narrow wooden cottages, the expectation remained the same. The future rested on the shoulders of a boy not yet born. Women, therefore, walked through their lives with a kind of quiet vigilance. Their bodies were watched closely, and every sign of pregnancy brought with it a mixture of anticipation and dread. A wife who produced sons gained a safer place within the household. A woman who did not find herself subject to scrutiny, whispered complaints, or strategic neglect. The emotional cost of this system was immense, but Tudor society treated it as natural, even inevitably. The broader culture reinforced these expectations. Laws centered on male inheritance. Parish records emphasized the importance of legitimate sons. Even the rhythm of gossip within the villages turned around who had successfully produced a male child and who had failed. It became a form of measurement, one that decided which families rose, which declined, and which quietly disappeared from local memory. A woman's ability to carry a son thus shaped not only her position within her home, but her family's standing within the community. Yet the irony of this system lay in its fragility. A single illness could take the life of an heir within days. Accidents were common, and even the healthiest children did not always survive winter fevers. Despite this uncertainty, families pinned everything on the hope of a boy, repeating the same patterns of expectation, generation after generation. The emotional strain of this fragile structure settled into the air of Tudor life, creating a tense undercurrent beneath the surface routines of work, worship, and celebration. It is difficult to imagine the weight carried by women during this time, especially when their futures depended on circumstances they could not fully control. They might eat carefully, pray regularly, rest as much as possible, and still bear daughters or lose pregnancies. Yet society treated outcomes as indicators of personal worth, assigning praise or blame without regard for the unpredictable nature of childbirth. In this way, the Tudor world built its stability on foundations both deeply valued and deeply unfair. The pressure extended even further when viewed through the lens of political ambition. Families close to the royal court schemed not only for heirs, but for heirs who might marry advantageously or serve within powerful households. A son could secure positions, alliances, and opportunities unavailable to daughters. At times, families placed greater emphasis on the birth of a boy than on any achievement gained through labor or intellect. Everything seemed to converge on this single point. Only a son could guard what they had built. This obsession reveals much about the Tudor era. It shows a society anchored in rigid expectations, openly vulnerable to the instability of inheritance. It exposes a structure dependent on women, yet dismissive of their autonomy. Most of all, it reveals how deeply people trusted in the promise of a child who had not yet drawn breath. In a world where sickness, conflict, and political turmoil could erase fortunes overnight, a male heir offered at least the illusion of permanence. The emotional landscape of Tudor households was shaped by this pursuit. Joy was conditional, fear was constant, and silence became a coping mechanism for those who bore the heaviest burden. Women learned to endure hope and disappointment with the same steady expression. Men learned to measure their fortunes through the narrow lens of succession. Even children grew up aware of the hierarchy shaped around them, sensing the quiet difference between themselves and the siblings who mattered most to the family's future. Everything here rests on a single expectation that governs the household from within. Even in moments of apparent calm, there is a pressure that never fully loosens its grip. And beneath that pressure lies the beginning of a story where one unborn child will shift more than anyone is prepared to admit. A mistress in a Tudor household occupied a place that looked secure from a distance, but felt unstable from within. Her presence could alter the atmosphere of a family, yet she held no legitimate standing to protect her when her sentiments changed. Every advantage she gained depended on the shifting preferences of the man who kept her close. The household might treat her with a certain politeness, but it was a politeness shaped by caution rather than respect. She lived inside a space where affection could vanish without warning, and where her entire existence rested on a foundation she could not control. Her lack of legal recognition determined nearly every aspect of her life. She could not claim inheritance, property, or authority. She could not sit at the family table as a true equal. She had no right to speak for the household in matters of land or reputation. Even her personal belongings might be considered temporary gifts rather than possessions she could defend. This absence of status followed her everywhere, in the glances servants exchanged when she passed, in the measured tone the wife used when forced to acknowledge her, and in the quiet judgments from relatives who regarded her as an intrusion rather than a member of the family. Dependence shaped her daily routine. She relied on the man's favor not only for protection but for basic security. A change in his mood could determine whether she remained in comfortable rooms or was pushed to the margins of the household. Should he fall ill, lose influence, or become occupied with other concerns, she risked being forgotten. There was no formal role to guarantee her place beside him. Even the servants who waited on her did so because they were ordered to, not because they recognized any rightful authority. This reliance created an unspoken hierarchy, in which the mistress hovered between privilege and vulnerability, able to enjoy certain luxuries, but never without the fear of losing them. Her interactions with the household revealed the fragility of her position. When she walked through the corridors, she sensed the tension that followed her steps. Some servants tried to remain neutral, carefully avoiding gestures that might appear disrespectful or overly familiar. Others watched her with thinly veiled disapproval, aware that her presence disturbed the traditional order of the family. She did not belong to them, yet she occupied their space, and her influence on the master shaped the rhythm of their work in ways they could neither challenge nor ignore. The wife carried the heaviest weight of these disruptions, but even the lowest servant felt the tremor caused by this additional figure in the household. Despite her uncertain standing, the mistress was often drawn into the emotional orbit of the household. She witnessed the private habits of the man she served, learned the patterns of his thoughts, and sometimes absorbed the frustrations that others could not express. Yet this intimacy did not protect her. It merely intensified the precarious nature of her position. For the more she became entangled in his life, the more she depended on his continued interest. She could not retreat without losing everything, and she could not move forward without challenging the boundaries that surrounded her. Replacement was a constant threat. The Tudor world viewed mistresses as interchangeable, believing beauty, youth, or convenience could justify a shift in favor. If another woman caught the man's eye, the current mistress had little recourse. There were countless stories of mistresses dismissed quietly, sent away with a small allowance if they were fortunate, or left with nothing if the household wished to erase their presence altogether. The uncertainty of these outcomes shaped the way mistresses behaved, cautiously, attentively, always aware that any misstep could accelerate their fall from grace. Even moments of apparent stability were shadowed by awareness of impending change. Favor could be withdrawn for reasons unrelated to the mistress herself. Political pressure, family conflict, or even the man's desire to restore order within his home. The mistress was rarely warned. Decisions occurred behind closed doors, carried out without ceremony, as though her removal were simply another adjustment in the household's daily operations. To those around her, she remained a figure both visible and temporary. Someone whose influence might be strong one day and non-existent the next. This fragile existence shaped her inner world. She learned to observe the subtleties of the household, reading expressions, gestures, and shifts in behavior to anticipate danger. She knew that her survival depended on understanding the silent dynamics of the family. She often moved quietly, spoke carefully, and avoided drawing unnecessary attention. Her life became an exercise in caution, even as she occupied a space that placed her close to the center of the household's private life. The mistress understood that she lived inside a structure that was not built for her protection. She could be praised, tolerated, or discarded, and none of these outcomes depended on her will. The Tudor household recognized her presence, but never anchored her place within its hierarchy. She lived suspended between influence and erasure, constantly negotiating a role that gave her visibility without granting her security. Her existence rests on conditions she cannot name aloud. The household shifts around her in ways that seem subtle, yet decisive. And within those shifting lines lies a moment that will place her in far greater uncertainty than she has ever known. Pregnancy for a Tudor mistress unfolded within a landscape defined by silence, uncertainty, and the constant threat of discovery. She carried the weight of a secret that could elevate her value or destroy her place entirely, depending on who learned of it and when. There was no guarantee of protection, for her condition did not grant her legitimacy. Instead, it exposed her to the scrutiny of a household already alert to her presence and ready to interpret every gesture, every absence, and every change in her appearance as a signal of shifting fortunes. Each day brought the same tension, the fear that someone would notice before she had any way to control the consequences. Rumours travelled with remarkable speed through Tudor homes. Servants moved between rooms, carrying whispers as naturally as they carried linens or trays. A change in her appetite, a moment of dizziness, or even the way she held her hands against her body could ignite speculation long before she understood her own condition fully. People watched her with quiet persistence, not out of concern but curiosity, for the possibility of a pregnancy suggested a disruption that touched the entire household. In this world, information rarely remained private, and once a rumor began, it developed a life of its own, gathering details and implications she could not shape. Because of this, silence became her only defense. She learned to mask discomfort, to control her gestures, and to adjust her movements so nothing appeared unusual. The servants who attended her became crucial figures, for their discretion determined whether her secret remained contained. A single, careless remark could unravel everything. Even loyal attendants walked a dangerous line, their service to her conflicted with their obligation to the household. They saw more than they ever admitted, and she could only hope their loyalties would not shift under pressure. Trust became a fragile currency, spent slowly and with constant hesitation. Living under these conditions meant that each month unfolded with a persistent sense of dread. She counted days in silence, aware of the changes within her body but unable to speak of them openly. The uncertainty was suffocating. Without a legal position, she could not rely on public acknowledgement or protection. She knew what happened to women in her situation when the household turned against them. Some were sent away quietly. Others were ignored until illness or exhaustion overcame them. A secret pregnancy left her exposed, vulnerable to decisions made in rooms she was not allowed to enter. As her body transformed, she faced the difficult task of maintaining the appearance of normalcy. Every meal, every interaction, and every gathering required careful performance. She kept her clothing arranged to obscure subtle shifts, avoided movements that might betray discomfort, and limited her presence in the household whenever possible. Even then, she could not erase the fear that someone had noticed a detail she had overlooked. The sense of being observed lingered constantly, shaping her days and tightening her nights with an unease she could not escape. The emotional burden deepened with the knowledge that discovery did not guarantee support. The man whose favor she relied upon might react with alarm rather than concern, worried more about household order or political implications than her safety. His response could shift instantly depending on his mood, the stability of his marriage, or the pressure of family expectations. She understood this instability far too well. The uncertainty of his reactions forced her to remain cautious. Even in private moments, she hid symptoms, withheld confessions, and attempted to navigate the early months alone. Meanwhile, the household continued its routines around her. The clatter of work, the murmur of voices, and the rhythm of daily tasks persisted unchanged, as though her secret did not pulse beneath the surface. But she felt the weight of time more acutely than anyone. Each passing month narrowed her options. With every subtle progression, the possibility of concealing the truth diminished. She lived within a narrowing corridor, balancing between exposure and endurance, hoping the moment of revelation would not come before she had some foothold to protect herself. Her isolation sharpened these anxieties. Even surrounded by people, she had no one she could speak to openly. The servants, who knew fragments of the truth, could not be fully trusted, and the women of the household, particularly the wife. You would interpret her condition through the lens of rivalry rather than compassion. The path ahead held possibilities, but none of them were safe. She might gain influence if the child proved to be a boy, but she could just as easily lose everything before reaching that point. The secrecy of her situation magnified these risks, forcing her to confront fears she could not voice. In such a tense environment, the simple act of waiting became a burden. She endured each day with a mixture of hope and trepidation, unsure whether she was moving towards security or disaster. The progression of her pregnancy felt like a quiet clock inside her body. Marking time, she could not slow or escape. She had seen what happened to other women trapped in similar circumstances. Their fates decided not by their own choices, but by the reactions of those who held power over them. The knowledge settled heavily upon her, shaping her thoughts as the months continued to pass. Her secret tightens around her with each passing day, creating a fragile calm she struggles to maintain. Those who move through the household carry hints of tension she cannot fully interpret. What rises beneath that quiet tension will draw far more attention to her condition than she is prepared to face. The atmosphere within a Tudor household could shift long before any official announcement was made, and the earliest signs often emerged in the quiet ways people altered their behavior. The mistress, still guarding her condition with as much discretion as fear allowed, sensed changes in the rooms she passed through. Servants who once avoided meeting her eyes now watched her with sharper attention, as though searching for confirmation of something already suspected. The corridors felt narrower, the conversations shorter, and the air carried a tension that seemed to hover just beyond explanation. What she carried remained unspoken, yet it pressed itself into the spaces around her with unmistakable weight. The wife felt the disturbance first. Her position in the household had always depended on legitimacy, marriage, lineage, and the steadiness of tradition. But the faint possibility of a male child growing in another woman's body unsettled every certainty she knew. She did not need evidence to sense danger. Even a hint of such a pregnancy threatened to fracture the balance she had worked to maintain. A mistress could be tolerated, dismissed, or ignored. But a mistress carrying a son introduced a complication that touched the core of inheritance. The wife found herself watching the younger woman with increasing vigilance, searching for signs that confirmed her unease, knowing that even the smallest indication of change could weaken her standing. Within the broader family, reactions unfolded in more restrained but equally consequential ways. Relatives who once regarded the mistress as an inconvenience began to consider her differently. If she carried a boy, she became more than a passing disruption. She became a potential safeguard, a spare male child, even one born outside marriage, offered a measure of protection to the lineage. It created contingencies that eased fears of dying without a direct heir. The family's outlook shifted, not out of kindness, but practicality. They assessed risks, advantages, and the possible outcomes of a child who might secure lands or titles should the legitimate line falter. Their calculations transformed the mistress, briefly, into a figure whose survival mattered. This new awareness did not grant her power. Instead, it made her the center of a silent, growing tension. The household watched her steps, measured her expressions, and tracked her routines with discreet curiosity. She felt the scrutiny intensify with each passing day. Her attempts to move quietly only seemed to amplify the suspicion surrounding her. What the family perceived in her movements was not her fear, but their own hopes or anxieties projected back at them. She became a mirror of their concerns, reflecting the fragile nature of their expectations. The unborn child shaped these dynamics more profoundly than any adult in the household. A boy, still weeks away from drawing breath, had already become a political question. His existence, real or imagined, challenged long-established hierarchies. Should he prove to be male and healthy, the household would be forced to renegotiate its internal structure. The wife's authority, the relatives' ambitions, and even the servants' loyalties would adjust around him. He represented continuity, leverage, and the unsettling possibility that the mistress might no longer be dismissed so easily. The power attached to his potential filled the house with a sense of unease that deepened as time continued its steady movement. The mistress felt these changes most sharply. She, too, understood that a male child could shift her position, but she did not mistake this for safety. Attention was a double-edged burden. If the family decided her presence threatened stability, they might try to remove her before the child could become an issue. If the man himself hesitated or reconsidered his loyalties, she could be cast aside with even greater speed. Her pregnancy, once a private struggle, became a source of vulnerability that linked her fate to the unpredictable decisions of others. She could not retreat without risking discovery, yet remaining visible carried its own dangers. The household routines continued, but beneath them lay a tension that touched every corner. Nothing had been formally acknowledged, yet everyone behaved as though preparing for change. The wife guarded her place more fiercely. The family assessed possibilities with renewed vigilance. Servants whispered cautiously, aware that even their smallest observations might matter. And through all of this, the mistress moved carefully, aware that her existence had become one of the most quietly disruptive forces within the home. What grew in her body was more than a child. It was a question, a threat, and a possibility that unsettled the established order. This was the nature of Tudor life. A single unborn boy could disturb the stability of an entire household, altering relationships, intention, and the fragile balance that held social structures in place. The mistress did not need to speak, and the wife did not need to confront her. The mere potential of a son reshaped the atmosphere around them, tightening the boundaries of what each woman could control. The shift within the household rests on a quiet expectation that no one dares to acknowledge aloud. Lines of tension settle into place as the family adjusts its posture around that unspoken possibility. A further pressure begins to rise beneath these adjustments, carrying consequences none of them are prepared to confront. The wife felt the disturbance long before anyone dared to speak of it. Her position in the household depended on legitimacy, reputation, and the quiet stability expected of a woman in her role. Yet all of these foundations trembled when signs pointed toward the mistress carrying a child. Her name, once a symbol of order, now stood at the edge of public scrutiny. She understood too well that even an unconfirmed rumor could weaken her standing. For Tudor society judged wives not merely by their conduct, but by their ability to secure the lineage. Any threat to that expectation pressed directly on her dignity, transforming ordinary moments into reminders of the precariousness of her place. The danger did not come from open hostility, but from the subtle ways people adjusted their behavior around her. Servants moved with a quieter caution. Relatives observed her with a mixture of concern and calculation. And the man of the household carried himself with a tension she could not ignore. These changes, slight on their own, formed a pattern that revealed how her authority had begun to shift. A mistress carrying a child, especially a boy, cast a long shadow, one that threatened to stretch across every aspect of the wife's daily life. She knew that even the suggestion of such a possibility invited comparisons she could not easily control. The pressure to produce a son intensified with each new whisper. The wife had always been aware of her responsibility to secure the family's future, but this new threat magnified expectations beyond anything she had endured before. Her body became the silent battleground on which the household placed its hopes. Every memory of a lost pregnancy, every year without a boy, every comment from a relative clung to her with renewed sharpness. The presence of the mistress, fertile and young, only deepened the contrast between the roles assigned to them. The wife felt the weight of time pressing against her, each moment reminding her that nature did not always move according to necessity. Despite this growing strain, she did not allow herself the freedom of open confrontation. The structure of Tudor life demanded restraint from a woman in her position. Outbursts were considered unseemly, and accusations without proof would only weaken her moral standing. Instead, she adopted silence as her shield. She moved through the household with measured calm, maintaining the routines expected of her, while carrying the knowledge of what might unfold. Keeping her composure became a form of resistance, a way of asserting control in a situation where direct action could easily backfire. Her silence, however, was not a sign of acceptance. It was a strategy shaped by necessity. Speaking recklessly could reveal fears she preferred to conceal, allowing others to interpret her vulnerability through their own interests. By remaining quiet, she preserved a veneer of stability that forced the household to confront its own uncertainties without her guidance. This approach created a tension that hung heavily in the air. People watched her for signs of collapse, but she gave them none. Her stillness transformed into a subtle form of power, one that complicated the household's expectations. Yet beneath this composed exterior, the wife grappled with a complex mixture of resignation and determination. She understood that her fate was entwined with the unborn child in ways she could not alter. If the mistress bore a boy, the household would inevitably shift around that new reality. If she herself could not produce a male heir, her influence might diminish regardless of her efforts. These possibilities pressed against her with relentless persistence, and she carried them in solitude, aware that any display of distress could be used against her. Her isolation deepened as the speculation grew. Conversations dimmed when she entered a room. Servants bowed with exaggerated politeness that masked their unease. The man of the household avoided lingering with her too long, as though he feared what she might ask or reveal. She felt the boundaries around her tightening, not through force but through the slow withdrawal of certainty. In this environment, silence was both her refuge and her burden, demanding constant vigilance to maintain. She also recognized that her reputation extended beyond the household walls. Neighbors, distant relatives, and visitors would interpret any shift in the family's dynamics as evidence of her success or failure. The possibility of a mistress bearing a son threatened to place her at the center of an unspoken judgment, one that questioned her value as a wife, even if she endured with dignity. Others might see her restraint as weakness, failing to understand the constraints she navigated. This awareness settled into her thoughts with persistent weight. Through it all, she clung to the only form of stability she could control: her behavior. She managed her expression, her posture, and her words with deliberate care. By refusing to acknowledge the mistress's condition openly, she limited the narrative others could construct. Her silence created a barrier between her and the household's shifting currents, preserving her authority in a space where certainty was increasingly scarce. But even this calm exterior could not erase the underlying truth. The future of the family might soon be determined by a child she did not carry. Her quiet restraint gathers around her like a protective wall she cannot afford to lower. Those who watch her move through the household sense deep attention, shaping every gesture. Pressure rising beneath that stillness prepares to alter the fragile balance she struggles to maintain. Families in Tudor society responded to uncertainty with a mixture of caution, calculation, and quiet self-interest. When signs suggested that the mistress might be carrying a child, the household's relatives began to observe the situation with greater attentiveness. They did not speak openly, for premature words risked committing them to positions they were not ready to defend. Instead, they watched from the edges of the daily routines, gathering fragments of information and weighing them against their own expectations. Bloodlines shaped every decision they made, and the possibility of an additional male child, born under circumstances both inconvenient and potentially useful, introduced considerations that extended far beyond personal sentiment. Their first concern revolved around lineage. The survival of a family's name depended on descendants who could inherit lands, titles, and responsibilities. A household without a male heir stood vulnerable, exposed to claims from distant branches or ambitious relatives. Thus, the idea of a child carried by the mistress, whether legitimate or not, forced the family to confront possibilities they might otherwise ignore. The absence of certainty regarding the wife's ability to produce a son left them searching for alternative sources of security. This was not a matter of affection or approval. It was a response shaped by the cold structure of inheritance. Comparisons soon followed. Relatives assessed the difference between a child born within marriage and one born outside it. The distinction carried immense weight in legal terms. Yet the practical implications often blurred in times of crisis. A legitimate son offered unquestioned continuity, but an illegitimate son, if acknowledged, could still become a stabilizing element within the family's long-term plans. They evaluated how such a child might be used to strengthen alliances, secure property, or serve as insurance against unforeseen events. Their considerations shifted with each new detail that filtered through the household, and these quiet deliberations influenced the subtle ways they interacted with both wife and mistress. Conversation within the family changed tone, becoming more measured and less spontaneous. Even simple comments carried undertones that revealed shifting priorities. A relative asking after the wife's health did so with calculated interest, wondering whether her condition might reveal anything useful. Another, speaking kindly of the mistress, did so with the awareness that her future held consequences for them all. Curiosity intertwined with caution, creating a pattern of behavior that exposed the careful balancing act each family member performed. They sought stability, yet stability depended on secrets not yet confirmed. Controlling the spread of information became an immediate concern. Families understood that rumors, once released into the community, could shape perceptions long before any truth was established. They needed to manage the narrative, not out of moral obligation, but to preserve their standing. Servants, who formed the backbone of the household's informal communication network, became central to this effort. Their conversations, whether intentional or accidental, could direct public opinion in ways the family could not easily reverse. Thus, relatives attempted to monitor them closely, offering rewards for discretion or issuing warnings when necessary. The family's internal communication mirrored this same restraint. They discussed matters behind closed doors, careful to reveal only what united them and concealed what might expose divisions. Some viewed the potential child as a threat to tradition, a disruption that undermined the wife's authority. Others saw an opportunity to reinforce their influence through an additional male descendant. These differences produced a quiet tension, one that manifested not in arguments, but in the subtle shifts of posture, tone, and presence whenever the household gathered. The mistress herself became the center of these unspoken debates. Relatives monitored her movements, interpreting every sign as evidence of their hopes or fears. Her silence only deepened their speculation. She represented both uncertainty and possibility, a figure who could either complicate or strengthen the family's future. Their reactions toward her were neither affectionate nor hostile, but calculated. They recognized that her condition, if proven true, carried implications they could not ignore. Even as they judged her position, they adapted their behavior in ways that revealed how much her fate mattered to the entire lineage. Managing the spread of rumors proved more difficult than they anticipated. The household's routines offered numerous opportunities for information to slip through unnoticed. Servants passed through markets, visited relatives, and participated in church gatherings where casual remarks could transform private knowledge into public discussion. The family understood the danger, but lacked the means to prevent it entirely. Their attempts at control created additional scrutiny, drawing attention to the very situation they hoped to obscure. Silence, once considered a tool, threatened to become a signal instead. Despite these complications, the family continued to navigate the uncertainty with measured patience. They could not intervene too openly without confirming suspicions, nor could they ignore the potential consequences. Their deliberations remained suspended between concern for the household's stability and ambition for future security. This fragile equilibrium shaped every decision they made and influenced every interaction within the home. They waited, not passively, but with calculated awareness, recognizing that time would eventually reveal the truth they sought to manage. Their deliberations settle into patterns shaped by lineage and caution. Quiet adjustments within the household reveal priorities shifting beneath composed expressions. Forces building inside this fragile silence prepare to impose choices none of them can entirely avoid. Childbirth within a Tudor household unfolded beneath layers of silence, caution, and strict control, especially when the mother was a mistress whose presence already unsettled the established order. The moment her labour began, the household shifted into a mode of quiet vigilance. Servants moved with deliberate care. Their steps softened, their voices lowered, as though loud sound alone might disturb the delicate balance holding the family together. What should have been an intimate and vulnerable experience became a carefully monitored event, one in which every detail carried political weight. The room chosen for the delivery was placed under discreet observation, not through overt guards, but through individuals positioned strategically to ensure that no one entered or left unnoticed. The birth room itself evolved into a secluded space, separated from the noise and rhythm of daily routines. Those allowed inside were chosen for their reliability, not their compassion. Their task extended far beyond assisting the labouring woman. They served as silent witnesses whose presence would later be used to validate or challenge whatever claims emerged from the event. The mistress, already exhausted by months of secrecy and fear, faced labour under the scrutiny of people who understood that her child might alter the fate of the household. Their attention, though outwardly focused on the process of birth, carried an undercurrent of evaluation that pressed against her vulnerability. Servants who attended the delivery bore responsibilities far greater than the physical tasks required of them. Their observations would form the first account of the birth, its timing, its conditions, and its outcome. In Tudor life, such testimonies became essential tools for verifying legitimacy or denying it. A servant's recollection could strengthen a claim or fracture it. This awareness settled into every gesture, every glance exchanged between them. They knew that the future of the household might depend on the words they spoke once the child entered the world. The mistress, though consumed by pain, sensed the weight of their presence and understood that her own voice held less authority than theirs. Outside the room, tension spread through the corridors with quiet precision. Relatives and household members waited for news with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. None dared to linger too close. Doing so risked exposing motives or appearing impatient. Instead, they moved through other tasks with forced calm, pausing occasionally to listen for sounds that might drift from the guarded area. Servants passing between rooms felt the pressure of these expectant gazes. Even the smallest expression on a servant's face, a frown, a nod, a moment of hesitation, could spark speculation. Silence became the most reliable tool for maintaining control. When news finally emerged, it did not travel freely. Information was filtered, shaped, and distributed with purposeful caution. Only select individuals received the initial report, and they conveyed it with measured neutrality. Details that might provoke unstable reactions were withheld until necessary. If the child was weak, that fact might be softened. If the child was strong, the announcement might be delayed to prevent premature excitement. Those managing the flow of information understood that the household's reaction could shift abruptly depending on how the message was delivered. Thus, they controlled not only the content, but the timing, ensuring that the family absorbed the news in a manner that aligned with broader concerns. Within the birth room, the mistress experienced the event in a way entirely different from the household watching outside. Her pain, her fear, and her hopes collided in a moment stripped of privacy. Though she was the one labouring, her child's arrival belonged instantly to a structure she could not shape. She did not know which details would be reported faithfully and which would be omitted. She did not know how the family would respond if the child lived, or how quickly they might distance themselves if the child appeared frail. Her vulnerability, already acute, reached a point of profound exposure. Once the child arrived, the servants moved with careful, deliberate actions, aware that their handling of the newborn would later be interpreted as evidence of the child's condition. Their murmured assessments, though quiet, carried significance far beyond the walls of the room. If they noted strength, it became a signal. If they noted weakness, it became another kind of warning. The mistress listened to their voices, searching for clues, knowing that the first moments of her child's life already held implications she could not control. Outside, the household continued to wait. People shifted from one room to another without purpose, trying to mask their curiosity. Each person held private concerns shaped by their position in the family. Some feared disruption to the established line of inheritance. Others quietly hoped for it. The birth, though occurring behind a closed door, touched them all. The atmosphere remained taut until the controlled announcement reached them, carrying only the information deemed acceptable for release. Even then, the household did not relax. The implications of the birth lingered, threading through their thoughts as they considered how the child's existence might alter the fragile balance within their home. The birth ended, the secrecy surrounding the mistress's condition, but it did not resolve the uncertainties that had defined the preceding months. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new phase, one in which every reaction would help determine how the household adapted to the presence of the newborn. The witnesses within the room, the relatives outside it, and the man whose favor bound the household together, all now faced a reality shaped by the child's arrival. The quiet tension that filled the home signaled not closure, but a shift in the delicate structures holding the family in place. Their attention gathers around the secluded room, forming a boundary that shapes how the event will be remembered. Movements within the household adjust to the first controlled whisper of news emerging from behind closed doors. Emerging tensions from this guarded moment carry implications that will reach far beyond the silence surrounding the birth. The first cry of the newborn did more than confirm life. It unsettled the entire structure of the household. The moment the sound echoed through the guarded room, those waiting outside felt an immediate shift, even though no details had yet been revealed. A cry meant the child lived, and if the servant's earlier whispers held any truth, it meant a boy had entered the world. In a Tudor household, the survival of a male infant carried implications that extended far beyond the emotions of the moment. It signaled the beginning of new calculations, new tensions, and new expectations that touched every member of the family. Inside the birth room, the boy's arrival transformed the atmosphere. The attendants, who had spent hours monitoring the mistress and preparing themselves to serve as witnesses, exchanged glances that held more meaning than words could convey. They understood that the newborn now represented a form of evidence, undeniable, breathing proof of the mistress's place within the household's unfolding story. The mistress herself, exhausted and shaken, sensed that the cry did not simply announce her child, but altered her position in ways she could not yet measure. She had spent months fearing the consequences of her pregnancy, yet now she confronted the weight of what her son's existence demanded. The infant, tiny and vulnerable, became a symbol the moment he entered the world. As servants examined him, their observations carried political weight. They noted the shape of his features, the strength of his voice, the steadiness of his breathing, all details that might later be cited as evidence of legitimacy or vitality. A strong cry would reassure those hoping for a potential heir, while any sign of frailty would provoke anxiety. Even the temperature of the room, the presence of witnesses, and the sequence of actions surrounding the birth might later be scrutinized by those seeking to confirm or challenge the child's significance. Outside the room, the household reacted to the cry with a mixture of restraint and anticipation. Relatives who had paced silently or waited with forced calm now exchanged measured looks. None of them spoke openly, yet their expressions revealed the shift occurring beneath their controlled demeanor. The wife, hearing the same cry, felt its weight more sharply than anyone. Her silence, once a form of stability, now pressed against her like a heavy curtain. She knew what the sound represented, not just a child, but a threat to the delicate order she had tried to preserve. The cry cut through the air with a clarity that left no room for denial. As whispers travelled through the household, the mistress's position changed in subtle but unmistakable ways. Months earlier, she had moved cautiously through the home, wary of attracting attention. Now, even though she remained physically weakened, the birth placed her in a role no one could dismiss outright. A woman who bore a son commanded a different kind of presence within Tudor society. She did not gain authority in the formal sense, but she gained relevance. Her child, not her own qualities, dictated the respect or caution others would extend toward her. That new relevance did not guarantee safety, but it ensured that her fate could no longer be decided lightly. Relatives began considering how the child might influence the family's future. Some saw him as an asset, a safeguard if the legitimate line failed. Others viewed him as a complication, one that threatened established claims and forced the household to reconsider its priorities. Discussions behind closed doors grew more intense, though voices remained quiet. No one wished to appear too eager or too concerned, for either response could reveal motives best kept hidden. The newborn's existence demanded careful posturing, not only from the family, but from the man whose actions would ultimately determine how the household adapted to this new reality. The servants, too, adjusted their behavior. Those who had witnessed the birth carried themselves with a new awareness of their role. Their testimonies would soon be requested, formally or informally, and they needed to ensure their accounts remained consistent. They understood that their words could confirm the child's importance or cast doubt upon it. As they moved through the house, they avoided speaking too freely, knowing that even a stray remark could ignite further speculation. The newborn's cry signaled the beginning of a new phase that none of the household members could escape. It was not simply a biological milestone, it was a moment that forced everyone to confront the implications of his existence. The mistress, once overshadowed and vulnerable, now found herself connected to a force that demanded attention. The wife, once secure in her position, faced a challenge that shook her sense of stability. The family, once comfortable with its assumptions, now re-evaluated its future with cautious precision. In Tudor life, a single child could alter hierarchies, disrupt expectations, and reshape the most carefully constructed plans. His arrival settles into the household with a weight that touches every corner of its silent routines. Responses from those who witness this moment gather into patterns shaped by caution and shifting priorities. Signals emerging from this fragile beginning prepare to unsettle boundaries none of them believed would be tested. The mistress, who had once moved quietly through the household, now found herself regarded through a different lens. Her son's cry had barely faded before the shift began. For months, she had lived with the awareness that she could be dismissed at any moment, her presence tolerated only because it caused little inconvenience. But the birth of a boy altered the assumptions governing her place. What had been weakness became relevance, and the same relatives who once overlooked her now observed her with cautious interest. She had not changed, yet the meaning of her existence had. Tudor society attached value not to the woman herself, but to the lineage she carried. And that lineage had suddenly acquired new significance. Her social value, once fragile and easily ignored, strengthened overnight. Those who had avoided acknowledging her now greeted her with a restrained politeness that concealed strategic calculation. The servants who previously whispered about her condition walked with greater respect when entering her chamber, aware that she was no longer simply the master's distraction, but the mother of a child whose future might intersect with their own. Even the household's routines adjusted subtly around her, as though the family hoped to signal control while quietly reshaping its expectations. She sensed these changes not as comfort, but as confirmation of how conditional her treatment had always been. The man at the center of the household, whose favor had once been unpredictable, no longer dismissed her so easily. The birth of a son drew him toward a responsibility he had not anticipated. He could not retract the reality of the child's existence, nor could he ignore the implications. His attention shifted in a way that felt less like affection and more like calculation. He visited her with greater frequency, not out of warmth but out of necessity. His presence carried the weight of decisions that might extend far beyond personal desire. She recognized this change, understanding that her relationship with him had become tethered to expectations, neither of them controlled. His posture toward her revealed an unspoken acknowledgement. She now held something the household could not overlook. Even if he did not openly alter her position, he adjusted the tone of his interactions. What he once dismissed with impatience, he now approached with deliberation. The shift created a space between them, filled with implications she could not articulate. She became both more visible and more constrained, aware that her son's survival tied her fate to choices he might not yet be ready to make. Within the family, negotiations began in forms that did not resemble formal discussions, but carried the same weight. Relatives, who once advocated for her removal, reconsidered their strategies. Eliminating her now risked complicating the status of the child, and no one wished to be responsible for destabilizing the line of inheritance. Instead of pressing for her departure, they explored ways to integrate the newborn into the family's broader plans. Conversations turned toward matters of support, guardianship, and future expectations. While no one spoke directly to her, she felt the shift in every lowered voice and every closed-door discussion. This change did not grant her security. It simply altered the nature of the danger. She was no longer invisible, but visibility came with its own risks. Relatives assessed her behavior, searching for signs of overconfidence or ambition. They feared that she might interpret her new status as an opportunity to challenge her husband or disrupt established hierarchies. Even as they negotiated her place within the household structure, they watched her with scrutiny sharpened by the knowledge that she held a connection they could not easily sever. The wife, though silent, remained an ever-present force in these considerations. Her authority could not be dismissed, yet the birth introduced a complication that required careful handling. The family could not diminish her position without risking scandal, nor could they ignore the implications of the mistress's son. Their efforts to balance these competing pressures created a tension that settled into the corridors of the home, shaping interactions and decisions in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. The mistress felt the weight of this transformation in every encounter. She understood that her newfound relevance did not arise from her qualities, but from her child's potential value. She bore the burden of this knowledge quietly, aware that her position rested on shifting ground. Every gesture she made, every request she voiced, and every moment she spent with her son contributed to the household's evolving perception of her. Her life, once defined by uncertainty, now stood at the center of delicate negotiations. She was not invited to witness, even within her private thoughts. She approached her new reality with caution. She knew how quickly favor could disappear, how easily circumstances could turn against her if the family decided she posed a threat. The son she carried had altered the balance, but that balance was fragile. Her future depended not on her own actions alone, but on the unpredictable combination of ambition, fear, and necessity shaping the decisions of those around her. Her position gathers strength from circumstances she never controlled, reshaping the household's quiet calculations. Movements within the family reveal shifting intentions that settle around her with growing complexity. Emerging currents from this fragile transformation are prepared to challenge assumptions none of them believed would be questioned. Presence of a son altered the household's internal negotiations in ways that unfolded with slow, deliberate force. What had once been a quiet secret, wrapped in fear, transformed into a figure around whom new strategies began to take shape. The infant himself remained unaware of the expectations shaping his surroundings. Yet his existence guided every calculation made by those who held influence within the home. In Tudor society, Lineage determined opportunity. And even a child born without legitimacy could become central to discussions involving property, alliances, and long-term security. His arrival strengthened the mistress's position, not through affection or acceptance, but through the practical leverage she now represented. Mistress and child became inseparable in the minds of those observing the household. The woman who once moved with caution, expecting dismissal at any moment, now drew the attention of individuals who previously ignored her. Their behavior did not reflect respect in the true sense, but rather recognition of the political implications of her son. Small gestures revealed the shift, servants stepping more carefully when entering her chamber, relatives speaking with a measured tone, and household routines adjusting to accommodate her recovery. These changes offered her no comfort, yet they signaled the altered perception of her place. Within the private chambers of the father, conversations took on a new seriousness. Its earlier unpredictability softened into a cautious awareness of the responsibilities created by the child's existence. He could not dismiss the newborn without risking tension within his own family. Nor could he ignore the expectations that arose from relatives who viewed the boy as an asset. His interactions with the mistress shifted accordingly. He remained distant in certain ways, yet his decisions carried a deliberateness that had not existed before. Gifts arrived without explanation. Visits grew more frequent, and instructions passed quietly through the servants to ensure her needs were met. Such gestures revealed the complexity of her new position. Influence did not equate to security. Her son's existence elevated her relevance, yet it invited scrutiny from every direction. Relatives interested in preserving the legitimate line observed her behavior closely, searching for any sign that she might attempt to claim more than they were willing to concede. Others, concerned with the stability of inheritance, evaluated her with a quieter form of calculation, wondering how best to integrate the boy into the family's plans. She carried the weight of these observations with calm restraint, aware that any display of ambition could jeopardize the fragile balance forming around her. Negotiations concerning the child's future began behind closed doors, shaped by competing priorities. Some relatives preferred minimal involvement, suggesting modest allowances to avoid drawing attention. Others pushed for more substantial provisions, arguing that neglecting the boy risked future conflict. Each viewpoint carried its own risks, and none offered a simple solution. Decisions regarding education, guardianship, and financial support became tools through which the family attempted to maintain control. Every plan involved the child as an object of exchange rather than an individual, reinforcing his status as a bargaining piece within the household's internal politics. These discussions expanded into matters of property. Even without legitimacy, the boy could be positioned to stabilize alliances or reinforce claims if necessary. Land grants, small estates, or yearly incomes were considered as methods of securing his cooperation later in life, or securing the cooperation of those who might one day act in his name. The mistress, though excluded from these conversations, felt their presence in the subtle shifts that accompanied each new decision. Servants approached her with greater caution. Relatives greeted her with calculated politeness, and the father's tone reflected a growing awareness of his own vulnerability. For her, these developments created a complicated form of responsibility. She recognized that her son's future, though elevated by circumstance, remained dependent on her ability to navigate a household defined by shifting intentions. Her gestures became more deliberate, her interactions more controlled. She avoided appearing either fearful or assertive, aware that both extremes could be used against her. The child had granted her leverage. Yet leverage without stability could become another form of danger. She carried this understanding quietly, letting it shape her movements as she adjusted to the new demands placed upon her. Extended family members studied the situation with increasing intensity. Their concerns were less about sentiment and more about maintaining influence within the household. Some feared the potential threat the boy posed to established heirs, Others saw in him a source of future advantage. Their differing hopes created subtle conflicts that settled into the atmosphere of the home, influencing conversations, decisions, and the unspoken boundaries within which everyone now operated. No one acknowledged these tensions aloud, yet every person felt their presence. The child himself remained unaware of the structural weight he imposed. His earliest cries had already placed him at the center of negotiations, assigning him a role that would follow him throughout his life. For the household, he represented possibility. For the mistress, he represented both shield and burden. His existence allowed her to remain, but also required her to navigate the household with greater precision than ever before. She had to preserve the fragile respect she had gained without giving anyone reason to challenge it. As days passed, the household adapted to the new arrangement. Though none dared call it settled, the boy's presence continued to shape decisions, influencing patterns of interaction that rippled through every room. The family attempted to balance competing priorities, protecting their lineage, managing their reputation, and containing potential conflict. Yet each attempt revealed deeper uncertainty. No agreement felt final, for each rested on conditions that could shift easily with time. Quiet negotiations circled the child, revealing intentions that stretch far into the household's uncertain future. Patterns surrounding the mistress reflect cautious adjustments shaped by interests she cannot fully see. Currents rising from these hidden deliberations move toward decisions none of them feel prepared to confront. Legal boundaries surrounding illegitimate sons in Tudor England shaped the trajectory of every life touched by such a birth. No matter the circumstance of conception, a child born outside of marriage entered the world with restrictions embedded into his very identity. These limitations did not depend on his abilities, temperament, or the affection he inspired. They were defined instead by laws intended to preserve family lines, maintain clear inheritance paths, and prevent disputes capable of dividing estates for generations. Within this structure, an illegitimate son held value, yet his value operated within narrow confines. He could not escape without intervention from forces above him. Inheritance offered the clearest example of these constraints. Custom and statute aligned to declare that a child born without legitimacy possessed no automatic claim to his father's property, titles, or rights. The father's acknowledgement alone carried no legal power to alter this rule. Even generous affection could not override the framework designed to protect established heirs. Estates passed through legitimate lines, preserving continuity and minimizing internal rivalry. Yet practical concerns often complicated this intent. A wealthy or influential man might wish to secure the future of his illegitimate son, not out of sentiment, but to stabilize relationships or prevent the child from becoming a source of future conflict. Still, such efforts required careful navigation. Paths toward semi-legitimacy existed, though they appeared infrequently and demanded significant authority. Under certain circumstances, a father could petition for recognition of an illegitimate son, granting him limited rights or enabling him to inherit specified property. These arrangements varied widely depending on rank, regional customs, and political leverage. A powerful nobleman might negotiate support agreements, land grants, or letters patent that elevated the child's prospects beyond what the law normally permitted. A man of lesser status rarely possessed such options. Even when pathways opened, they remained precarious. The legitimacy granted through these methods did not equal full inheritance rights and could be challenged by other family members seeking to preserve their own claims. Broader power dynamics also shaped these decisions. A father's position within court politics influenced the extent to which he could maneuver around legal boundaries. Favor with the crown, alliances with influential families, or strategic marriages could expand his options. Without such backing, even a determined father found himself constrained by systems designed to resist alteration. For the mistress, this meant her son's future depended not simply on paternal affection, but on the father's willingness and ability to negotiate within rigid structures. She held no standing to petition on her child's behalf. Her influence remained indirect, expressed only through the caution and restraint she employed in navigating the household. These limitations affected the child's upbringing as well. Education, guardianship, and social placement depended on decisions made by those with legal authority. Some illegitimate sons received training that prepared them for respectable futures, service in the military, clerical roles, or positions within the father's extended estate. Others were raised at the margins, supported quietly, but not publicly acknowledged. Each path reflected the father's calculation of how visible the child should be and how much investment he considered appropriate. Visibility could invite suspicion or resentment from legitimate heirs. Secrecy could undermine the child's value as a political or social asset. Balancing these concerns became part of the household's ongoing negotiation. Extended family members also shaped the discussion, often more forcefully than the mistress or the child himself. Brothers, uncles, or legitimate children evaluated the potential threat posed by an illegitimate son, especially if he displayed intelligence, a charm, or a resemblance to his father that drew attention. Their objections influenced decisions about inheritance arrangements or long-term support. A father with limited authority might defer to these pressures, choosing minimal involvement to avoid conflict. A father with stronger influence could resist such objections, though even his efforts rarely overcame legal restrictions completely. For the household, the existence of an illegitimate son introduced a layer of uncertainty that law alone could not resolve. Everyone understood the boundaries that shaped the child's prospects. Yet everyone also recognized the possibility that personal influence could bend these boundaries slightly. This tension created an atmosphere of cautious observation. People watched how the father handled the situation, how the mistress conducted herself, and how the child developed. Each shift in behavior hinted at future decisions that could alter the family's internal balance. Mistress and child remained bound to these limitations in ways they could not fully control. Their lives unfolded within a structure that prioritized stability over sentiment and lineage over individual circumstances. Even small changes in the father's political or social position could redefine their prospects. For better or worse, laws did not change quickly, but the interpretation of those laws varied depending on who held the authority to enforce or bend them. Boundaries written into law settle over their lives with a clarity none of them can escape. Choices made behind closed doors reveal how fragile those limits become when ambition intersects with bloodlines. Forces gathering at this intersection prepare to expose outcomes no one can fully control. Recognition within Tudor society operated on a level that written law could not fully capture. When legitimacy remained out of reach, the future of an illegitimate child depended almost entirely on the father's willingness to intervene. Documents, statutes, and customary rules carried weight, yet none of them matched the authority exercised by the man whose name could alter everything. His choices shaped the paths available to the mother and child, not through public declarations but through quiet signatures, arranged settlements, and discreet negotiations carried out beyond the reach of formal judgment. In this world, personal influence replaced legal certainty, and no life touched by such circumstances could rely on permanence. Within the household, the mistress recognized this reality with steady clarity. Every gesture from the father, every visit, every question, every request for updates, he signaled more than interest. These gestures revealed the degree to which he intended to integrate the child into his long-term plans. A distant father meant instability. A cautious father meant limited security. A calculating father, however, held the power to shift boundaries that usually remained fixed. Whether he acted out of pride, responsibility, or political intent mattered less than the simple fact that he could act. His choices eclipsed the protections that the law refused to offer. This imbalance shaped the atmosphere around the mother and infant. Servants adjusted their tone depending on how often the father appeared. Relatives monitored his behavior closely, evaluating whether he intended to acknowledge the child in ways that might complicate inheritance arrangements. Even those who disapproved of the mistress understood that her survival depended on decisions she could not influence directly. Respect, hostility, caution, and speculation merged into a quiet tension that filled the household, each reaction reflecting expectations tied to the father's next move. The possibility of formal recognition carried both relief and danger. A single written statement could secure financial stability, designate land, or assign guardianship. Such measures provided a form of protection that law alone denied. Yet each document also risked provoking opposition from legitimate heirs or ambitious relatives who preferred a clear succession line. These tensions created invisible pressure around every decision the father considered. Each step he took toward recognition altered relationships within the household and reshaped the future trajectory of those closest to him. For the mistress, the stakes were undeniable. She navigated her days with a careful neutrality that concealed both fear and hope. She understood that too much eagerness could be perceived as ambition, yet too little presence could reduce her relevance. Her survival depended on balancing these opposites without drawing attention. The child's future depended on the father's signature, but her influence over that decision remained indirect, shaped through conduct, restraint, and the way others interpreted her role within the family's increasingly fragile hierarchy. The father himself carried the burden of consequences, extending beyond personal sentiment. Recognition required more than willingness. It required a calculation of risk. His political connections, the stability of his household, the ambitions of his relatives, and his own long-term plans all factored into the choices he made. Granting protection to an illegitimate son could strengthen alliances or weaken them. It could stabilize property arrangements or complicate them. It could offer the father a sense of legacy or provoke resentment among those who believed their own rights superseded any obligation to a child born outside marriage. Each decision he considered enclosed him within a network of expectations he needed to manage with precision. Uncertainty became the defining force of this stage. Every person involved understood that the situation could shift without warning. Laws would not intervene to protect the mistress or her child. Only the father's continued willingness to act in their favor could provide any semblance of stability. Even then, each act of recognition carried no guarantee of permanence. Support could be withdrawn. Agreements could be altered. Circumstances could change with political developments, family conflicts, or shifts in alliances. The mistress learned to read these movements with quiet attention, aware that her place within the household remained negotiable. The broader household responded to these possibilities with cautious silence. Servants withheld judgments. Relatives observed from a distance. Advisors weighed risks privately. No one spoke openly about the consequences of the father's decisions. Yet every action he took influenced how they approached the mistress and her child. Expectations grew, faded, and reformed with each passing week, creating an environment shaped less by law and more by the volatile influence of a single individual whose choices defined the path ahead. In Tudor England, personal authority often carried more force than written regulation. Legitimacy mattered, but acknowledgement could reshape opportunity. The law set limits, yet power determined how those limits were applied. For the mistress and her son, survival rested not on legal protection but on the unpredictable trajectory of the father's intent. Within this fragile landscape, nothing remained fixed, and no outcome could be assumed. Recognition determined their future more decisively than any statute written to contain them. Quiet expectations gathered around each decision the father considered, reshaping the household's internal balance. Movements forming within this uncertain space prepare to reveal consequences that none of them can yet foresee. Shifts within the household settled around the legal wife with a weight she could not ignore. No matter how composed her exterior remained, Every development surrounding the mistress and her son pressed against the boundaries of her authority. Nothing had been taken from her directly. Yet the indirect challenge struck deeper than an open confrontation ever could. In Tudor society, a wife's position rested not only on marriage vows, but on her ability to secure lineage, uphold her family's honor, and maintain stability within the home. The birth of an illegitimate son created a fracture that required no words to be understood. It altered expectations, redirected quiet conversations, and placed her under scrutiny more intense than she had faced before. The challenge emerged not through explicit threats, but through subtle changes in how others behaved. Servants who once moved confidently under her direction now carried traces of hesitation, sensing the shift in household priorities. Relatives observed her with measured expressions, uncertain whether her influence still held its former strength. Even the man at the center of the situation approached her with a controlled politeness that revealed more distance than respect. None of these gestures amounted to defiance. Yet together they formed a pattern that signaled a weakening of her undisputed place. Pressure surrounding her ability to produce an heir intensified. The mistress's son did not replace the legitimate line. Yet his presence cast a shadow over the expectation that the wife should secure continuity. Conversations shifted when she entered a room. Older women exchanged glances. Advisors lowered their voices. Every comment about lineage, family strength, or future security seemed to rest on her shoulders. She recognized these cues immediately. In Tudor households, fertility represented proof of worth, and the absence of a male heir, even temporarily, opened space for doubt to grow. Her daily life adjusted to these silent demands. She maintained her routines with the same precision as before. Yet each task carried a heightened awareness of who watched and what conclusions they might draw. Simple interactions, seating arrangements at meals, the distribution of household responsibilities, and the tone with which she greeted guests acquired new weight. Any sign of fragility could be interpreted as a weakness. Any display of frustration could be used to undermine her authority. She learned to rely on restraint as her strongest defense. The threat she faced extended beyond personal insecurity. It touched on the structural power of her position. Should the mistress's son gain too much recognition, alliances within the family could shift. Members who valued stability might begin to consider the child a practical alternative, should the wife fail to provide a legitimate male heir. Power did not vanish instantly. It eroded gradually, through whispered comparisons and hypothetical scenarios discussed privately. The wife understood how these conversations unfolded, even if she never heard them directly. Years of navigating household politics had taught her to sense changes long before they became visible. The husband's behavior added another layer of uncertainty. His attention, once predictable, now shifted according to calculations she could neither influence nor observe. His interactions with her remained formal. Yet the absence of genuine engagement revealed consequences more troubling than anger or argument. Distance suggested that he weighed possibilities in which she played a reduced role, or one defined more by obligation than partnership. In Tudor households, emotional withdrawal often preceded political repositioning. She recognized the pattern and prepared herself accordingly. Despite these challenges, the wife maintained control through silence rather than confrontation. She understood that open resistance would only strengthen the mistress's symbolic role within the household. A controlled, measured presence offered the clearest path to preserving influence. She moved through the home with steady composure, reinforcing the habits and expectations that had long anchored her authority. Servants responded to consistency. Relatives respected predictability. She relied on these truths to stabilize the ground beneath her. Yet her internal landscape remained marked by a steady unease. She knew her position depended on an outcome she could not entirely command. Fertility remained uncertain, and no amount of discipline or composure could guarantee the future others expected from her. This lack of control, more than any direct challenge, shaped the fear she kept hidden. The mistress's son represented both a tangible threat and a symbolic reminder of the fragility of her place. Even without deliberate intention, the child's existence tested her influence in ways she could not counter openly. Around her, the household adjusted to these shifting realities. Servants aligned themselves with whichever path they believed would offer the most stability. Relatives carried their concerns discreetly. Yet their decisions reflected priorities influenced by the situation. The wife watched these movements with quiet calculation, understanding that her survival required patience, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to the role she had been entrusted with. Unspoken tensions settle around her position, shaping each decision with deliberate caution. Subtle shifts in loyalty reveal pressures that extend far beyond her control. Currents forming within this quiet uncertainty prepare to challenge the authority she struggles to preserve. Shifts surrounding the mistress and her son reshaped the husband's behavior with a clarity that required no declaration. Affection, once offered freely or withdrawn unpredictably, no longer guided his decisions. Practical concerns replaced sentiment, settling into every gesture he directed toward the household. He evaluated situations with a measured calm that revealed the extent to which he now viewed relationships through the lens of advantage rather than emotion. In Tudor society, a man's standing rested on lineage, reputation, and the strategic use of every connection available to him. The birth of an illegitimate son widened his field of calculation, leaving little space for impulses that once might have governed his interactions. Interest in the child emerged not as tenderness, but as recognition of opportunity. He observed the boy with a quiet focus that suggested he understood the leverage such a presence could provide. A son, even one born outside marriage, expanded his options. The boy could serve as a political tool, a stabilizing figure, or a bargaining piece should future negotiations require flexibility. This practical view altered the father's priorities. He arranged for certain comforts, ensured proper care, and monitored the child's development, not because of paternal devotion, but because he recognized the value that careful attention could yield over time. His relationship with the mistress adapted accordingly. The unpredictability that once characterized their interactions gave way to a steady, calculated distance. He did not elevate her position, yet neither did he dismiss her as readily as before. She now functioned within a framework shaped by her usefulness, and he maintained the connection with a disciplined consistency that reflected this shift. He visited her quarters with intentions guided by strategy rather than emotion, ensuring she remained cooperative and stable. Without granting her influence, he was not prepared to acknowledge publicly. Every decision he made concerning her aligned with the broader goals he crafted after the child's birth. For the wife, these changes revealed themselves through patterns rather than confrontation. She witnessed how he distributed his time, how he adjusted household priorities, and how he responded to questions regarding the boy's future. His demeanor toward her remained polite but remote, shaped by obligations rather than genuine partnership. She sensed the strategic focus guiding his actions, understanding that he weighed her position against the new dynamic created by the mistress's son. This awareness deepened the distance between them, settling into their daily routines with a quiet finality. Relatives also observed his altered behavior. Those who favored stability interpreted his actions as an attempt to manage risk. Those who feared disruption questioned whether he intended to grant the boy greater recognition. His choices became points of speculation, shaping alliances within the household as individuals positioned themselves in anticipation of potential outcomes. The man understood these pressures, yet he remained committed to decisions that preserved his advantage. Whether he reinforced the legitimate line or explored alternative arrangements depended on shifting priorities he evaluated with careful deliberation. His interactions with servants further reflected this transformation. Instructions regarding the mistress and her child grew more precise. Discretion became a priority, He reinforced expectations that information should flow only through designated channels. Aware that rumors had the power to complicate his plans, servants responded with the caution he demanded, adapting to the new hierarchy that placed the child at its center without altering the official structure of the home. The man managed these dynamics with steady control, balancing secrecy with the need to maintain order. Underlying each action was an awareness of how fragile advantage could be. In Tudor households, fortunes changed quickly. A single illness, a shift in political favor, or the birth of a legitimate male heir could redefine the relevance of the boy and, by extension, the mistress. The man accounted for these possibilities, ensuring that no decision bound him too tightly to one future. He viewed relationships as assets to be maintained, adjusted, or abandoned according to circumstances. The mistress and her son held value now, but he kept his options open, navigating the household with a flexibility shaped by ambition rather than loyalty. Such changes did not produce open conflict, yet their impact settled deeply into the household. The wife felt the burden of diminished attention. The mistress felt the weight of conditional support. Servants adjusted their behavior according to the signals he released, aligning themselves with whichever path appeared most stable. Through it all, the man maintained a composed exterior, revealing nothing beyond the steady progression of his plans. His transformation reflected not cruelty, but a pragmatic response to shifting circumstances. In a world governed by inheritance and influence, emotion held little authority. Calculations guided every decision, shaping his interactions with each person connected to the child's future. Whether these choices ultimately stabilized or fractured, the household remained unseen. But the direction of his behavior left no doubt about the motivations behind it. Subtle adjustments in his conduct settled through the home, revealing priorities shaped by strategy rather than sentiment. Patterns forming around his decisions expose the conditional nature of every connection he maintains. Emerging tensions born from this calculated distance are prepared to alter the balance that once seemed secure. Quiet adjustments shaped the mistress's behavior in the months following the birth, revealing a deliberate strategy that differed from the uncertainty she once carried. The arrival of her son shifted the conditions around her. Yet, she understood immediately that advantage did not equal safety. Influence gained through a child could disappear as quickly as it formed, especially in a household governed by lineage, rivalry, and unspoken hierarchies. She moved carefully, shaping her actions around the recognition that survival depended not only on the father's decisions, but on the perceptions of everyone watching her place within the home. Each step she took reflected a controlled understanding of the fragile power she now held. Crafting the image of a devoted mother became her first and most accessible tool. She remained close to her son, attentive to his needs, and visibly involved in his care without appearing demanding or ambitious. The household observed her steadiness, noting that she presented herself as someone shaped by responsibility rather than self-interest. This impression served her well. In Tudor society, maternal devotion carried symbolic weight, offering her a form of legitimacy she could not claim through law or status. By anchoring her presence in the role of a quiet caretaker, she reduced the likelihood of resentment while strengthening the perception that the child depended entirely on her stability. Avoiding scandal became equally important. She understood that any public misstep, any display of frustration, carelessness, or ambition could be used to justify her removal. Her days unfolded with disciplined restraint. She avoided appearing in places where her presence could provoke comparison to the legal wife. She refrained from discussing her situation with servants who might twist her words. When interacting with relatives, she maintained a respectful distance, speaking only when necessary, and never commenting on matters that did not concern her directly. Silence, once a condition imposed on her, now became a strategic tool she wielded with intention. Control over the servants formed the foundation of her long-term position. She recognized that those who worked within the home observed everything: quiet conversations, shifting alliances, and private behaviors others attempted to conceal. Their loyalty or their silence could determine whether rumors spread or died before reaching dangerous ears. She approached this with patience, offering small kindnesses where appropriate, acknowledging their efforts without creating suspicion, and ensuring that no servant felt overlooked. These subtle gestures accumulated over time, shaping a network of individuals who viewed her with a mixture of respect and caution. She did not require devotion, she only needed reliability. Her understanding of influence extended beyond daily interactions. She sensed that each member of the household assessed her through the lens of long-term implications. The legal wife observed her, searching for signs of ambition that could justify intervention. Relatives evaluated whether she presented a threat to the inheritance lines. Servants monitored how the father interacted with her. Maintaining consistency became her defense. She avoided sudden changes in behavior, ensuring that no one could accuse her of manipulating the household's dynamics for personal gain. Predictability, once a limitation, now served as a protective structure around her and her child. She also managed her relationship with her father with deliberate care. His shifting attitude, practical, calculating, and rooted in strategic advantage, required a level of awareness she had not needed before. She did not seek greater intimacy, nor did she challenge the distance he maintained. Instead, she allowed him to interpret her behavior as steady and dependable, someone who posed no risk to his reputation or household authority. This approach helped preserve the support he offered. Fragile as it was, she did not expect permanence, but she recognized that presenting herself as a stabilizing presence increased the likelihood that he would continue to protect her son. Over time, her strategy shaped the atmosphere around her quarters. Servants moved with calm efficiency. The child's needs were met without delay. Relatives approached her with quiet formality rather than hostility. Even the legal wife's observations carried less overt tension, replaced instead by the acknowledgement that the mistress had not exploited her new position. None of this guaranteed safety, yet it created a predictable environment in which she could operate without fear of sudden accusations. Beneath this carefully cultivated calm rested the understanding that circumstances could change quickly. Should the legal wife produce a male heir, the mistress's relevance might diminish. Should the father face political pressure, he might distance himself. Should rumors spread, she could lose the network she had worked quietly to build. Her strategy, therefore, relied on constancy rather than ambition. She anchored herself to the simple, undeniable truth that the child depended on her and that the household, for now, accepted her presence because she gave no one reason to challenge it openly. Her approach never sought to claim power directly. Instead, it aimed to secure the space she occupied and the future her son might one day inherit. Through patience, measured actions, and the strengthening of subtle alliances, she created conditions that allowed her to remain visible without becoming vulnerable. Each choice reflected a long-term understanding of how influence settled within Tudor households, not through confrontation, but through endurance. Quiet discipline shapes her presence, reinforcing an image others cannot easily dismiss. Shifts in household behavior reveal how her patience gathers strength beneath the surface. Tensions waiting within this controlled environment prepare to test how far her influence can extend. Recognition of the mistress's new position unfolded gradually, settling into the household with a steadiness that no one could deny. Her presence, once tolerated without significance, now aligned directly with the infant, whose future shaped every conversation behind closed doors. The household observed this shift, not through public declarations, but through the quiet adjustments made by those who understood how influence accumulated in Tudor families. She no longer occupied the role of a temporary companion who could be dismissed without consequence. Instead, Her survival was intertwined with the boy's existence, creating a bond that strengthened her relevance each day. Those who once expected her removal found themselves recalculating, aware that her absence could destabilize arrangements designed to protect the child. Relatives adjusted their attitudes first. Their earlier confidence that the mistress could be erased faded as the father's continued involvement signaled long-term intention. The household monitored these changes with caution. No one said aloud that her status had improved. Yet every gesture suggested acknowledgement. She became a fixed part of daily routines, not out of acceptance but necessity. The child could not be separated from her, and no alternative caretaker offered the same stability. Removing her would create a disruption that risked drawing attention to matters the family preferred to keep controlled. Her endurance became a practical requirement rather than a charitable allowance. Her relevance extended into conversations that originally excluded her. Decisions concerning the child's future, education, residence, and financial support shifted subtly toward considerations that included her well-being as part of the long-term calculation. The boy's dependence on her made it impossible for the family to plan without indirectly shaping her circumstances. These adjustments did not grant her authority. Instead, they reflected recognition of the role she played in preserving an arrangement the household needed to maintain. She understood this dynamic clearly, and she did not attempt to exploit it. Her restraint reinforced the impression that she contributed stability rather than disruption. Her daily movements reflected this careful understanding. She avoided stepping beyond the silent boundaries that defined her place. Yet she carried herself with a calm that suggested she knew her relevance could not be dismissed easily. Servants noticed the change before anyone else. Their behavior shifted accordingly. They no longer treated her with the distance reserved for temporary figures. Instead, their deference reflected respect shaped by the permanence implied in her connection to the child. Their loyalty did not arise from affection, but from recognition of her role in the household's evolving structure. They understood that influence often traveled through proximity, and she now occupied a space near the center of future decisions. The legal wife felt this change with a clarity that required no confirmation. She recognized how the household adjusted around the mistress and child. The threat did not emerge through direct opposition, but through the silent integration of the mistress into long-term planning. The wife watched these developments with disciplined composure, aware that expressions of resentment would expose vulnerability. She maintained her authority through steadiness. Yet she could not ignore the subtle erosion of the uncontested position she once held. The mistress's presence now shaped expectations that reached into every corner of the home. The father's behavior reinforced her new relevance. His visits followed a predictable rhythm that signaled sustained involvement. He evaluated the child's development with a seriousness that indicated long-term interest. These actions strengthened the mistress's position indirectly, anchoring her stability through the responsibilities he accepted. She did not misinterpret this as affection. Instead, she recognized that he maintained her presence because her removal would weaken the arrangement he intended to preserve. She understood that his decisions functioned through practicality, not sentiment, which clarified the boundaries of her influence and the conditions of her continued security. The broader household adapted as well. Advisors, relatives, and visiting allies adjusted their tone when speaking of the child, and by extension, of the woman responsible for him. She became part of the family's unspoken future, treated neither as an equal nor as an outsider, but as someone whose existence shaped decisions they could not avoid. Her earlier vulnerability receded into the background, replaced by a cautious respect rooted in her essential role. She held no official status, yet her influence emerged through the undeniable truth that the boy could not be separated from her. Still, she never considered herself safe. She recognized that her position depended entirely on the child's relevance and the father's continued willingness to support him. Political shifts, personnel decisions, or unexpected circumstances could alter her future at any moment. For this reason, She moved through the household with quiet discretion, preserving the calm that allowed her influence to grow without drawing opposition. Each gesture reflected a long-term understanding of how survival functioned within Tudor households, through endurance rather than confrontation. Her transformation from a woman who could be dismissed to a figure whose shaped decisions did not occur through ambition, persuasion, or direct conflict. It emerged through necessity. Her presence anchored the stability of the boy's future, and the household recognized this truth even when they wished it were otherwise. The woman, once considered temporary, now stood at the center of the family's unspoken calculations, her influence woven into every choice involving the child. Her continued presence settles into the household as an unavoidable part of its future. Shifts in attitude reveal how necessity reshapes power more effectively than intention. Currents gathering around her, growing relevance move toward consequences that the family can no longer prevent. Recognition of the illegitimate son settled into the household with a steady force that none of them could dismiss. His presence shaped discussions that once focused solely on the legitimate line, introducing possibilities that transformed the internal balance of the family. In Tudor society, the absence of a male heir created vulnerabilities that extended far beyond personal disappointment. Estates, alliances, and long-term stability depended on securing a successor capable of carrying the family name. When the legal wife produced no son, or when her health raised doubt, the attention shifted quietly toward the boy born outside marriage. He became an unwritten answer to a question the family preferred not to confront openly. This unspoken reality altered the atmosphere surrounding the legal wife. Though no one accused her of failure, the household evaluated her through a lens that measured potential rather than loyalty. Each passing year without a male heir deepened the uncertainty she carried. Servants maintained a polite distance. Relatives offered carefully worded encouragement, and advisors avoided remarks that could be interpreted as pressure. Yet the tension formed beneath every gesture. The existence of the mistress's son provided the family with an option they could not acknowledge publicly but could not ignore privately. The child's presence introduced quiet divisions within the household. Some members viewed him as practical insurance, a safeguard against the chaos that could follow the absence of an heir. Others resented his existence, fearing he might dilute or threaten their claims. These differing views remained unspoken, but shaped alliances formed behind closed doors. Individuals aligned themselves according to what they believed would protect their future influence. The boy did not yet understand the forces gathering around him. Yet his existence guided decisions made by adults who recognized the potential advantage he represented. Whispers about succession rarely appeared in open conversation, yet they shaped the tone of family interactions. Advisors calculated scenarios in which the boy might serve as a stabilizing presence if the legitimate line failed. Relatives discussed financial provisions with caution, revealing their awareness of the shifts occurring beneath the surface. Servants sensed these movements and adjusted their behavior accordingly. They became more attentive to the mistress's quarters, recognizing that proximity to the child could influence their own security within the home. Such changes formed gradually, settling into the rhythm of the household until they appeared as natural as routine. Pressure on the legal wife intensified in this environment. Her position remained secure in name. Yet the quiet comparison between her and the mistress shaped the way others observed her. She felt the weight of expectation even when no one spoke it aloud. Fertility, lineage, and responsibility intertwined into a burden she could not escape. Each sign of hesitation, each moment of fatigue, became a point of speculation. She understood how these judgments accumulated, eroding confidence in her ability to secure the family's future. Meanwhile, the mistress's stability increased in proportion to the boy's growing importance. She did not flaunt this shift, nor did she attempt to claim authority. But her place within the home gained a quiet durability. The household recognized that removing her would destabilize the child, and destabilizing the child risked undermining the family's contingency plan. Her role became both essential and confined, crucial to the boy's well-being, but restricted to the boundaries imposed by her unofficial status. She moved within these limits with deliberate care, aware that her influence depended entirely on maintaining the appearance of calm necessity. The father played a central role in shaping how the boy functioned within the family's long-term strategy. His decisions revealed whether the child would remain a private matter or evolve into a recognized asset. He monitored the situation with practical attention, balancing political pressures, personal ambitions, and the delicate structure of the household. His involvement signaled to others that the boy's presence served a purpose beyond sentiment, reinforcing the notion that he might act as a reserve heir if circumstances demanded it. As months passed, the child's significance deepened, not through open acknowledgement, but through the steady accumulation of choices made by those who recognized the uncertainty surrounding the legitimate line. Discussions about land, alliance, and commitments took his existence into account, even when his name remained unspoken. The household adapted to this reality with cautious acceptance. They understood that he represented stability in a world where the absence of a clear successor could invite conflict. In this quiet transformation, the boy became the center of a balance maintained between competing interests. His presence restrained factions within the family, preventing them from asserting dominance prematurely. Those who opposed his inclusion could not dismiss the practical need he fulfilled. Those who supported him understood that their position required discretion. The result was a fragile equilibrium that shaped the household's future long before the boy understood the role assigned to him. Quiet adjustments within the family reveal how necessity shapes their unspoken priorities. Subtle shifts in loyalty settle around the child, exposing tensions that reach beyond household walls. Forces building beneath this fragile balance prepare to redefine which future the family chooses to protect. Uncertainty surrounding the mistress's position settled more heavily as the household confronted possibilities that could shift the balance against her. The influence she gained through the birth of her son never formed a permanent foundation. It remained conditional, shaped by variables beyond her control. Everyone in the home understood how quickly priorities could change in Tudor society, where lineage, alliance, and reputation carried greater weight than sentiment. The mistress recognized this truth with increasing clarity. Her stability depended not only on her quiet discipline, but on circumstances that could redirect the family's intentions without warning. The greatest threat arose from the prospect of the legal wife bearing a legitimate male heir. This possibility carried implications that reached deeper than the mistress's daily fears. A legitimate son would instantly assume the central position within the family's future, rendering the mistress's child less essential to the household's plans. Relatives who tolerated her presence out of necessity would no longer see a reason to maintain such accommodation. Advisors who once included the boy in their private calculations would shift their attention toward the rightful heir. The family would regain the clarity of succession it valued, and the mistress's relevance could diminish with a speed that made her vulnerability unmistakable. The mistress understood this without needing to hear it spoken. Every sign of the legal wife's health, every whispered remark and every quiet moment in which the household seemed to hold its breath reinforced the uncertainty she carried. Her days unfolded under the weight of this possibility. She moved with composure, yet her restraint concealed the recognition that her entire future could shift with a single announcement from across the household. In such a moment, her child might receive continued support, but her own presence could become unnecessary. Tudor families rarely maintained connections that no longer served their strategic interests. Another threat emerged from the family's ability to sever ties if circumstances demanded it. For now, her presence offered stability for the boy. Yet, if relatives perceived that removing her served a greater benefit, the decision could unfold with calculated ease. Arrangements could be made to separate her from the household under the guise of propriety, moral order, or the desire to protect the child. She understood how such decisions took shape, quietly, collectively, and without confrontation. The household's routines could shift around her absence with practiced efficiency, leaving little trace of the role she once played. Even more precarious was the possibility of losing the father's support. His involvement formed the only consistent protection she held. Without his interest, her influence dissolved. His recognition of the child, his willingness to provide resources, and his occasional visits created the foundation upon which her survival rested. Should his ambitions redirect toward new alliances, political obligations, or personal interests, her position could weaken quickly. His attention, already shaped by calculation rather than emotion, could move elsewhere without disrupting the structure of the household. The mistress recognized that losing his support meant confronting a future in which she could not rely on anyone else within the home. This awareness shaped her behavior in ways that required constant vigilance. Every action she took reflected an understanding that her stability depended on maintaining conditions she could not directly control. She ensured her conduct remained free of provocation, avoided any action that could be interpreted as ambition, and remained attentive to the shifting rhythms of the household. Servants who once responded warmly to her adjusted their tone according to perceived changes in her standing. She noticed these shifts closely, understanding that servants often sensed instability before anyone acknowledged it openly. Her network of quiet alliances formed a fragile line of defense. These connections offered information, assistance, and a degree of loyalty shaped not by affection, but by the predictability she provided. Yet even this network could fracture if the family's intentions turned against her. Loyalty in Tudor households remained fluid, guided by self-preservation rather than personal bonds. She recognized that those who supported her today might distance themselves tomorrow if the household signaled a change in priorities. Each day unfolded with a balance of composure and alertness. She cared for her child with steady devotion, aware that his future remained intertwined with her own. Yet beneath this calm rested an understanding that circumstances could shift before she had the chance to prepare. Her position required endurance rather than expectation. Stability depended on remaining useful without appearing threatening, present without demanding recognition, and essential without seeking authority. She lived within these boundaries carefully, shaping her survival around conditions she could influence only through disciplined restraint. In the quiet spaces of the household, those observing the situation recognized the tension surrounding her place. They saw how her relevance increased or faded according to decisions made far beyond her reach. They understood how quickly a woman in her position could be displaced. Yet they also recognized that her endurance reflected a clarity of purpose shaped by necessity. Each day, she remained within the home, demonstrated her ability to navigate uncertainty with the steadiness required for survival. Quiet doubts settle around her position, revealing how easily shifting interests can redefine her fate. Subtle signals within the household expose the fragility of every protection she depends on. Emerging pressures beneath this uncertainty move toward choices that could determine whether she stays or disappears. Arrangements surrounding the mistress and her son formed quietly, taking shape in conversations that never appeared in official records. These decisions emerged not through public declaration, but through calculated exchanges between those who understood how influence functioned within Tudor households. Support offered to the mistress did not reflect affection or recognition. It reflected strategy. Each agreement served to stabilize the child's position, contain potential conflict, and maintain the family's long-term interests. The terms remained unspoken outside a small circle, yet their impact defined the conditions under which the mistress lived. She sensed these developments as they unfolded, recognizing that her survival depended on agreements she could neither negotiate nor reject. Long-term financial support formed the first layer of these arrangements. The father, aware of the expectations surrounding him, ensured that provisions were set aside discreetly. Funds transferred through intermediaries, recorded in ways that avoided drawing attention, offered the mistress a degree of security that guarded against sudden dismissal. This support did not elevate her status but stabilized it. She remained dependent. Yet the reliability of these arrangements signaled that her presence served ongoing purposes. Relatives recognized these provisions not as generosity, but as evidence of the father's intent to maintain control over the situation. Her financial dependence became a managed condition rather than a vulnerability. Securing separate housing often followed the establishment of financial support. A residence arranged for the mistress and her son served multiple goals at once. It preserved propriety by removing her from the daily dynamics of the main household. It prevented tension between her and the legal wife, reducing opportunities for scandal, and it allowed the father to maintain involvement without jeopardizing his public reputation. Such arrangements offered privacy without autonomy. The mistress understood that the residence existed not for her comfort, but for the convenience of those who wished to contain her influence. She accepted this reality with steady clarity, aware that rejecting such provisions would destabilize the fragile protection surrounding her child. Education for the boy represented the most significant long-term commitment within these hidden agreements. Decisions regarding tutors, training, and social placement revealed the father's intentions more clearly than any financial support. A boy raised as a gentleman could one day serve the family's interests in ways that extended beyond inheritance. He could support alliances, hold minor offices, or act as a stabilizing presence during transitions of power. The mistress watched these choices unfold with a mixture of hope and caution. Education promised opportunity, yet it also carried the risk of separating the boy from her as he grew older. She recognized that the family might eventually claim him for their purposes, a possibility she could neither prevent nor resist. These arrangements, though designed to secure stability, created an atmosphere defined by unspoken obligations. Servants responsible for coordinating these provisions moved with careful discretion, aware that revealing details could disrupt the balance the family worked to maintain. Relatives monitored the situation with interest, interpreting each new development as a signal of the father's long-term strategy. None of them discussed these matters openly, yet their behavior reflected a shared understanding that the mistress and her child played a role the family could not ignore. The mistress herself adapted to these conditions with quiet discipline. She understood that every agreement, no matter how beneficial, carried potential risk. Financial support could be rescinded. Housing arrangements could be altered. Educational plans for her son could shift according to changing priorities. Her position remained tied to circumstances beyond her control. She learned to endure these realities without expectation, shaping her daily life around the knowledge that stability offered today did not guarantee protection tomorrow. Still, these hidden agreements provided a structure that allowed her to continue raising her child with a sense of order. She maintained her routines, managed her interactions with caution, and preserved the appearance of calm that had long defined her strategy. These choices did not grant her authority, yet they reinforced the impression that she contributed stability to an otherwise delicate situation. Those observing her behavior recognized that she operated within constraints she did not challenge, and this restraint helped preserve the agreements that protected her son. The boy, unaware of the decisions shaping his future, grew within a framework meticulously designed to prepare him for a life he could not yet comprehend. His mother watched him closely, understanding that the education he received and the opportunities arranged for him reflected a future built through negotiation rather than birthright. She accepted that his advancement might eventually require her absence, yet she remained committed to providing the consistency he needed in his early years. These hidden arrangements defined the household's approach to the unresolved tension surrounding the mistress and her son. Their effectiveness depended on secrecy, cooperation, and the steady discipline of those involved. Everyone understood that these agreements could shift if circumstances demanded it. Yet for the moment, they provided a structure that maintained order within a situation shaped by uncertainty. 1. Quiet negotiations shape the boundaries of her stability, revealing how carefully each decision is constructed. Subtle adjustments in support expose the conditional nature of every promise surrounding her and her son. New pressures forming within these hidden agreements move toward outcomes that no one can fully predict. Private origins of the child gradually gave way to consequences that extended far beyond the quiet room where he was born. What began as a concealed relationship, managed through secrecy and caution, unfolded into a matter that required the attention of those responsible for guiding the family's future. The mistress understood this shift even before anyone spoke of it. The boy's presence shaped decisions that once excluded her entirely, drawing lines between personal history and political strategy with a clarity that no one could ignore. In Tudor households, private actions often carried public weight, and the child's existence proved how quickly intimate circumstances could influence matters far beyond their original setting. Discussions that once revolved around appearance, reputation, and discretion transformed into considerations shaped by long-term planning. Advisors who never acknowledged the mistress in the past now evaluated the implications of the child's presence. They studied the father's behavior, assessed the stability of the legitimate marriage, and calculated the potential benefits or complications the boy might introduce. These deliberations remained hidden behind closed doors, yet their effects permeated the household, influencing attitudes, whispered conversations, and small changes in routine. Those who recognized the political dimension of the situation understood that the child had become part of a broader negotiation involving alliances, inheritance, and the preservation of influence. The father's role deepened accordingly. His involvement no longer revolved around personal responsibility, but around shaping the household's long-term trajectory. He weighed how the boy might serve as leverage in future disputes, how recognition or distance could alter alliances, and how the mistress's continued presence affected internal stability. These calculations demanded precision. A misstep could provoke resentment from relatives, embolden factions within the household, or create opportunities for rivals. His actions reflected these pressures. He chose his visits carefully, issued instructions with deliberate restraint, and monitored the reactions of those around him as closely as he monitored the child's development. The mistress watched this transformation with a steady awareness that reflected her growing understanding of the forces surrounding her. She recognized that her son's future no longer belonged solely to the private world they once occupied. Decisions made in distant rooms now shaped the direction of their lives. She moved through the household with calm discipline, avoiding any action that could suggest an attempt to influence the process. Her restraint served as her only defense against the unpredictable shifts that accompanied such negotiations. She maintained her image, preserved her quiet alliances among the servants, and remained prepared for changes she could neither anticipate nor resist. Every stage of the boy's development carried increasing significance. Those who ignored his existence during his infancy now observed him with cautious interest. His behavior, his health, and even the resemblance he bore to his father shaped how others interpreted his potential role within the family. Relatives evaluated whether he demonstrated traits that could be molded into future usefulness. Servants monitored how attention toward him shifted, adjusting their own behavior to avoid misreading the household's evolving priorities. The boy himself remained unaware of the silent expectations forming around him. Yet his presence bound every person in the home to a future shaped partly by his growth. As conversations shifted from personal concerns to political considerations, the household adapted in ways that revealed the underlying tension. Advisors examined opportunities that might arise from acknowledging the boy discreetly. Alliances potentially strengthened by his presence became topics of quiet speculation. Even those who opposed his involvement recognized that refusing to consider him entirely could create vulnerabilities for the family. Stability required flexibility, and the boy represented an option none of them could dismiss without deliberation. His existence introduced pathways that reached beyond domestic boundaries, influencing decisions with implications extending into the family's external relationships. For the legal wife, this shift intensified the pressure she already carried. Her place within the home depended on maintaining authority, yet every indication that the boy factored into political planning threatened her position indirectly. She sensed the quiet reassessment of her role. She understood that succession decisions could reshape expectations around her, altering how others measured her value. The mistress's newfound relevance, tied entirely to the child, deepened the wife's concern that her influence might diminish if the boy continued to grow in importance. This understanding settled into her daily life with a severity she could not acknowledge openly. The mistress, too, understood the fragility of her situation. Political relevance did not guarantee safety. It simply changed the terms of her vulnerability. She remained at risk of displacement should the family's plans evolve or should new circumstances render her position inconvenient. Still, her proximity to the boy kept her indispensable. No alternate caretaker could replace her without provoking disruption or damaging the child's stability. This necessity shielded her. Yet she recognized how easily necessity could shift with time. For now, she maintained her quiet resolve, prepared to adjust as the household's demands changed. Through these developments, the child became the center of a transition that none of them openly acknowledged. His existence blurred the line between private relationships and public strategy, binding personal history to political calculation in a way that defined many Tudor households. Those who once dismissed him now recognized how deeply his future intertwined with their own. His life charted a path the family could use, ignore, or reshape, depending on the pressures that emerged from within and beyond the household. Private concerns drift into broader planning, revealing how the child's future shapes decisions far removed from his origins. Subtle shifts in attention expose the growing role he plays within the household's unspoken strategy. Pressures forming around his significance move toward outcomes that could redefine every life connected to him. Perception of the mistress beyond the household operated through layers of judgment shaped by custom, expectation, and the quiet rigidity of Tudor norms. Her existence carried a contradiction that defined every interaction she experienced outside the private rooms that protected her. Society viewed her with suspicion, curiosity, and calculated interest, forming opinions that rarely aligned with the realities of her daily life. She occupied a position both visible and dismissed, tolerated yet condemned, and this duality shaped the boundaries of her world. Those who spoke of her did so with certainty, even though few understood the circumstances that bound her to the family she served through her child. Judgment formed the foundation of her public identity. Neighbors, distant relatives, and passing acquaintances measured her worth not by her conduct, but by the circumstances of her relationship. Being attached to a man who belonged to another woman placed her at the edge of acceptability. She became a figure interpreted through moral frameworks she had no power to influence. People observed her presence and drew conclusions rooted in assumptions rather than truth. Even when she behaved with restraint, her reputation remained fixed within a narrow category that left little room for nuance. Yet the same society that condemned her also found ways to benefit from her position. Those seeking advantage understood that proximity to the mistress offered access to information, influence, or opportunities unavailable through formal channels. Merchants extended courtesy if they believed her connection to the household held potential value. Relatives who disapproved of her privately maintained controlled politeness when they sensed her child might shape future decisions. She learned to recognize these contradictions, understanding that the same individuals who whispered about her behind closed doors often approached her with courtesy when they believed it served their interests. This dual response formed the uneasy foundation of her public life. Respect remained conditional at best. She received attention shaped by curiosity rather than genuine regard. When she appeared in public spaces, people observed her with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. Some viewed her as a cautionary figure, a woman whose circumstances represented the unpredictable consequences of private choices. Others saw her as someone who navigated a world they preferred to ignore. regardless of the interpretation. She rarely encountered interactions free from underlying judgment. Her presence challenged expectations of propriety, and society responded by keeping her at a controlled distance. Her identity extended into two distinct worlds: the hidden one, defined by her relationship to the father, and the visible one shaped by how others perceived her. In the private sphere, her relevance depended on the child she cared for and the decisions made by the household. In public, she existed as a symbol shaped by rumor, speculation, and the calculated restraint of those who observed her. This dual existence forced her to navigate boundaries that offered no clarity. She carried herself cautiously, aware that any misstep could influence how others interpreted her place within both worlds. Movement between these spheres required careful discipline. When she ventured beyond the household, she adopted a quiet demeanor that revealed neither pride nor shame. She avoided conversations that might invite speculation, choosing instead to maintain a presence defined by calm neutrality. Those who encountered her interpreted this restraint according to their own assumptions. Some saw it as humility, others perceived it as a tacit acknowledgement of her position. She understood that controlling perception mattered more than correcting it, and she shaped her behavior accordingly. Over time, her public image evolved not because society grew more accepting, but because her connection to the child altered how others assessed her relevance. The boy's growing importance softened some judgments, though it never erased them. People who once dismissed her entirely now reconsidered her position, recognizing the influence she might hold through her son. Still, this shift did not grant her full respect. It merely changed the angle from which they viewed her, allowing a degree of cautious acknowledgement that remained firmly bounded by conditions she could not control. Despite these complexities, she endured the public gaze with quiet steadiness. She understood that her identity in the eyes of society would always be shaped more by circumstance than by the intentions she carried. She accepted that she would remain both inside and outside the boundaries of respectability, navigating a life divided between the secrecy of her role and the visibility that accompanied her child's significance. Her resilience formed through necessity, not choice, reflecting the reality that survival required a disciplined approach to the impressions others formed without ever knowing her fully. Through these shifts, her existence embodied the conflict between personal truth and public interpretation. She learned to move through judgment without responding to it, to accept conditional respect without depending on it, and to inhabit two spheres that never aligned comfortably. Her survival rested not in reshaping society's perception, but in maintaining the discipline necessary to live within the contradictions that defined her life. Quiet interpretations of her behavior reveal how society balances judgment with self-interest. Subtle distinctions in how she is addressed expose the limits of the acceptance she receives. Pressures building around her divided identity move toward outcomes shaped by forces she can only endure. Long-term implications of an illegitimate son extended far beyond the circumstances of his birth, settling into the structure of the family in ways that shaped future generations. His presence carried possibilities that ranged from opportunity to conflict, and these possibilities depended less on his own actions than on how the household chose to position him over time. In Tudor society, lineage determined access, stability, and influence. Even a child born outside marriage could leave an imprint that altered the direction of a family's history, though the nature of that imprint varied according to shifting priorities. Unspoken tensions and fragile alliances. One path for such a child involved being granted land or a minor office. These provisions served practical purposes, offering the boy a stable livelihood while preventing him from becoming a source of future burdens or disputes. Land grants, arranged quietly and recorded through indirect channels, allowed him to maintain a respectable existence without challenging the legitimate line. Offices, military or administrative, offered a similar outcome, providing status without inheritance. These options required careful calculation, They needed to elevate the child enough to secure his future, while avoiding implications that threatened the rights of legitimate heirs. Families used such measures to manage risk, employing opportunity as a tool to stabilize internal relations. Yet the same boy could become a source of ongoing conflict, his existence, tied directly to the father's lineage, introduced uncertainty that relatives often struggled to navigate. Should he grow into a capable, intelligent, or charismatic young man? Comparisons between him and legitimate heirs might provoke tensions rooted in competition rather than affection. Questions about resemblance, merit, or paternal preference could ignite disputes that carried consequences far beyond personal relationships. Disagreements over inheritance provisions, financial arrangements, or the extent of his recognition could divide family members into factions that persisted long after the father's death. These conflicts, though often concealed from public view, could influence marriages, alliances, property distribution, and even legal disputes carried into later generations. Tensions deepened when the boy's potential clashed with the ambitions of others. A legitimate heir who felt threatened might attempt to restrict his opportunities. A relative seeking to strengthen their own standing might align with him to gain leverage. Advisors could use his presence to influence decisions, shifting the household's internal balance subtly but decisively. In these scenarios, the child became a symbol for broader disputes rather than an individual with agency. His position reflected the unresolved questions surrounding loyalty, succession, and influence that marked many Tudor families. At the opposite extreme, some illegitimate sons disappeared from historical records entirely. Their lives unfolded in silence, documented only through scattered references or not at all. This erasure resulted from deliberate choices made by families seeking to avoid scandal, simplify inheritance, or protect reputations. Removing a child from official accounts did not necessarily mean neglect. A boy might receive financial support, education, or housing while remaining absent from public documents. Yet the effect remained the same. His story became invisible, absorbed into the private memory of those who knew him, but excluded from the historical narrative. This absence revealed the extent to which families controlled their legacy through omission, as much as through record-keeping. The mistress understood these possibilities, with a clarity shaped by observation rather than instruction. She recognized that her son's future extended into spaces she could not influence directly. Each decision the family made, each grant, provision, or silence, carried implications that would follow him through adulthood. Her responsibility lay in preparing him as steadily as circumstances allowed, providing discipline and stability that matched the opportunities or limitations imposed upon him. She embraced this role with quiet resolve, aware that his long-term legacy depended on choices shaped by forces beyond her reach. The family, too, approached his future with deliberate caution. They recognized that the boy's path required careful construction, balancing generosity with restraint. Stability demanded managing potential threats while preserving the cohesion necessary to protect the legitimate line. Their choices reflected these priorities, shaping a legacy that could benefit the child without jeopardizing the household's broader goals. These decisions required cooperation among relatives who often disagreed, forcing them to confront tensions that might otherwise have remained dormant. Over the decades, the boy's legacy could extend into unexpected places. A minor landholder might influence local politics. A military officer could serve with distinction, carrying the family name into circles that once excluded him. A well-placed administrative role could create connections that strengthened the family's long-term influence. In many cases, his achievements, public or quiet, outlasted the secrecy surrounding his origins. Yet the opposite remained equally possible. The child might fade into obscurity, his name forgotten, his existence acknowledged only through scattered hints in household papers. His long-term significance, therefore, rested not in a single outcome, but in the uncertainty surrounding every possibility. The legacy of an illegitimate son remained fluid, shaped by the interplay between opportunity, conflict, and omission. Each path reflected choices the family made to protect its interests, revealing how influence could be constructed, contested, or erased according to the demands of lineage and reputation. Quiet projections of his future reveal how legacy forms through choices shaped by caution and ambition. Subtle decisions made in private expose the fragile boundaries between recognition and disappearance. Shifts, gathering around his uncertain path, move toward outcomes that could elevate, divide, or erase him. A child born outside a lawful marriage could shift the internal balance of a Tudor household in ways no one admitted openly. Observers understood that a woman once considered temporary might suddenly occupy a strategic position that was difficult to remove. Her presence no longer depended on affection or private preference. It became tied directly to the bloodline that connected the child to the family's future. Power in such a setting did not rest on titles or social approval. It rested on the unquestionable reality of lineage. And lineage carried weight that reshaped expectations, obligations, and long-term decisions. In that environment, a single son could turn a mistress into a political asset whose relevance persisted far beyond the circumstances that created her role. The shift often happened quietly. Each relative, advisor, or servant adjusted their behavior according to what they believed the situation required. The father, who once approached the relationship casually, now evaluated the implications of every choice. His attention shifted from the woman to the child, and from immediate desire to practical calculation. Decisions concerning property, alliance, and household management began to incorporate the presence of an additional heir-like figure, even if the law did not recognize him fully. Questions that had never been asked before moved into private discussions. How much support the boy should receive, how visible he should be, and what expectations surrounded his future. The legitimate wife sensed this change first. She observed the altered tone of conversations, the sharper interest in the child, and the quiet adjustments in how relatives regarded the mother. The threat was never expressed directly, yet it shaped her daily reality. Each gesture from the household reflected the weight placed on the boy's existence. Her position remained secure in name, but stability depended on more than formal status. She needed to maintain influence, present steadiness, and manage perception carefully. The rise of the child forced her to strengthen her own network within the household, building alliances that could protect her standing when decisions were made behind closed doors. Relatives approached the situation with measured caution. Their concerns centered on inheritance, political alliances, and the long-term stability of the family name. Some viewed the child as a complication that introduced uncertainty. Others saw him as a potential advantage, especially if the legitimate line appeared weak. Every conversation contained layers of unspoken strategy. Opinions formed not around sympathy for the mother, but around calculations concerning future influence. The legitimacy of birth mattered legally, but the presence of the child mattered practically. In many cases, practicality held more immediate power. The household staff adapted as they always did, quietly, observantly, and with awareness of shifting priorities. Servants who once ignored the mistress now acknowledged her presence with subtle respect. They recognized that her access to private rooms and private conversations could shape their own futures. The child's nurse, attendant, and those responsible for daily care found themselves pulled into a circle of relevance they had never expected. Information flowed through them, and information carried value. They adjusted their loyalties accordingly, responding to the new tension that defined the household. The mistress, once tolerated but never fully accepted, sensed the change with a mix of caution and determination. Her survival no longer depended on maintaining an emotional connection. It depended on protecting the child's future. She adjusted her behavior to avoid unnecessary attention. She maintained a controlled distance from household disputes. She presented herself as stable, consistent, and dedicated to the boy's well-being. The absence of scandal became a necessary shield. Any misstep risked undermining the fragile position she occupied. Yet she understood that the boy created space for her that did not exist before his birth. Her role gained durability not through social acceptance, but through the practical reality that removing her could disrupt the boy's stability. Over time, the influence of the child extended beyond the private household. Local communities noticed changes in how the family interacted with him. Minor officials, clergy, and those connected to regional administration interpreted these observations with interest. The presence of a child linked to a prominent man carried implications for marriage negotiations, future alliances, and property settlements, even without legal rights. The boy represented a potential shift in the family's long-term plans. That potential shaped how outsiders regarded the household. Within the family archives, his existence might appear as a brief note or a carefully worded entry. Some families recorded such children openly. Others concealed them behind indirect references. The degree of visibility reflected broader strategic decisions. If the child was expected to play a role in military service, local administration, or estate management, his presence needed to be acknowledged. If stability required silence, his name remained absent. Families controlled these decisions deliberately, understanding that written records influenced future generations. The mistress's long-term position solidified through the boy's development. As he grew older, his education, discipline, and conduct became points of focus. Tutors assessed his abilities. Relatives evaluated his temperament. Advisors considered how he might serve the family's interests. Each observation contributed to a picture that shaped his future path. The mother remained central to this development, not through authority but through proximity. Her role persisted because the child required stability, and stability depended on her continued presence. As years passed, the boy's integration into the family varied according to necessity. He might receive land, a military appointment, or a role in managing estate affairs. These provisions offered him structure while preventing conflicts with legitimate heirs. Yet his presence continued to influence the household. His achievements could strengthen the family's reputation. His alliances could expand their influence. His failures could expose unresolved tensions. Observers noted these developments with controlled neutrality. They understood that the household operated within rules shaped by necessity rather than idealized social expectations. A mistress might never become a wife. Yet her relevance persisted because the child carried a connection that could not be dismissed. This connection reshaped the internal order of the family, creating a new balance between formal hierarchy and practical influence. By the time the story settled into memory, the transformation seemed gradual rather than dramatic, yet its effect endured. A child born from an unrecognized union had rearranged expectations, altered relationships, and reshaped decisions that influenced the family's future. The woman, once considered temporary, became a fixed part of the household structure. Power did not shift loudly. It shifted through small adjustments, accumulating over time until the new order became the accepted reality. And so the legacy of that child extended far beyond his birth. It reached into every room of the household, into every decision, and into the quiet calculations of those who managed the family's future. The story of his life became intertwined with the story of those who raised him, protected him, and shaped the space he eventually occupied. In this way, the household rewrote itself around a presence it had not expected but could no longer ignore. Thank you for staying until the end of this long, quiet journey through Tudor shadows. May your night be calm, your rest steady, and your thoughts softened by slow history. Good night, and sleep well.